Good morning. As we are now just a few days from Chanukah, I wanted to continue with some more insights into the Gemaras in Maseches Shabbos about Chanukah, and we're continuing now on Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Bais, page 21b. It's a fairly well-known Gemara, and I want to share with you a few insights into it. Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a Brisa. Mitzvahs Ner Chanukah, the mitzvah of Chanukah candles, is Ner Ish Ubeso, is one candle for each person and his household. V'amahadrin, those who are more scrupulous about their mitzvah performance, Ner L'chol Echad Ve'echad, will light one candle for each family member, which means this second way of doing it is each night, each family member lights one candle, or perhaps one member of the family lights one candle for each member of the family, but it's the same number of candles every single night. V'amahadrin mina mahadrin, the ones who are more scrupulous than those who are more scrupulous. So then there's a disagreement what to do. Bais Shammai Omrim, the opinion of the house of Shammai is Yom Rishon Madlik Shmona, that the first day of Chanukah you light 8 candles. Mikan ve'elech, as you continue on during the week, Poches v'holech, each day you diminish, you subtract one of the Chanukah candles. Ubeis Hillel Omrim, Bais Hillel say, Yom Rishon, on the first day of Chanukah, Madlik Achas, you light one candle. Mikan ve'elach, as the week continues, Mosif v'holech, you add on more candles each and every night of Chanukah. And of course, conventionally, we all do like Bais Hillel, that the first night of Chanukah, we light one candle, and as each night of Chanukah continues, we add another candle. There is an interesting distinction between the Sephardic and Ashkenazic customs, and that is that the Sephardic custom is that only one menorah is lit in the house for everybody in the house, and each night an additional candle is added. Whereas according to the Ashkenazic candle, each person in the house, each night, adds another candle on top of what he was lighting on the previous nights. Now I want to spend a couple of moments discussing over here sort of the reason for these different customs. Meaning the Gemara had said that the second level is that each night everybody in the household should light a candle for themselves, which is very different than other times that we find halachos about lighting candles. For example, we lit candles in the Bais HaMikdash in the temple. It wasn't a case of every single person lighting a candle. Rather, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, lit candles for the entire Jewish nation. Or if you want to bring it to something more contemporary, we can talk about Shabbos candles. Shabbos candles, the mother of the house lights candles for everybody, and nobody else in the house lights candles. So why is it all of a sudden, when it comes to Chanukah, that there is a concept that each and every person in the household should light the Chanukah candles? So I saw brought down in the name of a sefer called Binas Yisrael, it's not a work that I'm familiar with, that he wants to explain that, as we know, the darkness of Chanukah that we're trying to reject by lighting the Chanukah candles is the darkness that was brought on by the Yevanim, by the Syrian Greeks who were ruling over Israel at that point in time when the Chanukah story occurred. And what concerned Matisyahu and his sons at that time was the fact that the Syrian Greeks were actually imposing upon the Jewish people various foreign ideas that were against the Torah ideology. Right now, we're not going to get into what that was. Maybe we'll get into that in a different discussion. But the point of bringing in the light of Chanukah is to shine the light of Torah, the light of true spirituality in the darkness that was being created by the Syrian Greeks who did not believe in any spirituality. As we'll discuss soon, they only believed in what they perceived to be the empirical sciences, and they rejected all else. So the Jewish people were being affected by that mindset, and many of them were abandoning Judaism for what they believed to be the more logical and rational Syrian Greek approach to life. But when we get affected by other ideas, it doesn't affect each person in the same way. Each one of us is influenced a little bit differently than others. And it's a very personal thing in terms of where our mindset is holding at a certain time, and maybe what exactly is the rectification that we need, each of us as individuals, on the nights of Chanukah. And therefore, he says that's why, unlike Friday night or unlike in the Bais HaMikdash, when there's one menorah for everybody, but when it comes to Chanukah, each individual should be lighting their own menorah to bring down the light that they personally need for the night of Chanukah, to get rid of any foreign darkness which is covering over the light of Torah for them. With regards to, one other thing. As we saw in the Gemara, there's different levels. There's the basic level of lighting Chanukah candles, one for the house. Then there's a Mahadran, one for each person. And then there was the Mahadran Mina Mahadran, which the way we do it is every night adding on another candle for each person who's lighting. And it's a very strange thing, because if you take a look in halacha, you will not find in other areas of halacha that the Gemara or the Shulchan Aruch prescribes so many different levels of doing the mitzvah. I can actually think of one other example, and that would be truma. Truma, which is taking some of your grain and giving it to the Kohen, so which is a Torah requirement. So really from the Torah, you're only obligated to give one grain to the Kohen. But the sages said that if you're a generous person, you should give 1/40th. An average person should give 1/50th of his crop, and a stingy person should give 1/60th of his crop. That's about the only example I can think of other than this, where Chazal instituted different levels of performing a mitzvah. So why is that over here? So the Bais Halevi wants to explain that because in this case itself, the entire reason why the miracle occurred was because of the fact that the people wanted to go above and beyond the minimum requirement for the mitzvah. And the people wanted to do the mitzvah in the absolute best way possible. When it came to lighting the candles in the Bais HaMikdash, and we'll talk about what exactly that means momentarily. And that's why the sages instituted a basic way to do your Hanukkah candles, and then a nicer way, a better way to do it. The reason is as follows. After they recaptured the Bais HaMikdash, they were faced with a problem. They didn't have enough oil to last for 8 days until they'd be able to get a new supply of oil. And of course, as we all know, they lit the menorah, and miraculously, they ended up with enough oil to last for 8 days. But there would seem to have been a quote-unquote simple way to solve the problem. The simple way to have solved that problem would have been to use thinner wicks than those which were normally utilized every night in the Bais HaMikdash. The Gemara discusses the thickness of the wicks, and there was a certain standard amount of oil and a certain thickness of the wicks that was used, and they had figured out exactly how much oil and how thick the wick should be, so that generally there would be enough oil in the menorah to burn through the long winter nights. But in this case, where they were out of oil, or they had a minimal amount of oil, they could have easily solved the problem by using much thinner wicks. Yeah, the light wouldn't have been as bright as it normally should be, but at least they would have had wicks and oil to last 8 days. But the people refused to do that. They wanted to do the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah candles in the absolute best way possible, rather than doing the mitzvah in the, not of the Chanukah candles, but of the candles in the Bais HaMikdash in the best way possible, and not to get away with doing it in a more minimalist way because of the lack of oil. And because of that, when Chazal instituted the mitzvah of Neiros Chanukah, they also gave us a minimalist way of doing it, and then a better way of doing it as well. And another thing that the Bach wants to say in terms of how they went beyond the letter of the law when it came to the Chanukah lights, because as you'll recall, the problem was the lack of oil that was pure. All the oil that was there in the Bais HaMikdash had been defiled by the Syrian Greeks invaders. But there's a very interesting halacha, and that is that even though we are obligated to do all of the avoda, all of the service in the Bais HaMikdash in a state of purity, there is one, and therefore if somebody is tameh, if somebody is ritually impure, or one of the elements needed for the service in the Bais HaMikdash is tameh, ritually impure, it's not allowed to be used. There's one exception. That exception is that when the nation is in a state where the majority of the people are ritually impure, and you have no way of obtaining and utilizing materials that are ritually pure, then the necessity of the service in the Bais HaMikdash trumps the problem of the ritual impurity of the Tumah. And therefore, the Bach says, really, the people could have just used the impure oil. But once again, the same idea, they didn't want to do the mitzvah in a secondary way. They wanted to do the mitzvah of lighting candles in the Bais HaMikdash in the absolute best way possible. And again, because they didn't want to do it in the minimalist way, they wanted to do it in a better way. So too, Chazal instituted the mitzvah of the Chanukah candles in a minimalist way and then in a better way. I'll share with you one more point, and then we will stop for this morning. We saw over here that there is a bit of a argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and that is in terms of the Mahadran and Mina Mahadran, in the best way to be lighting the Chanukah candles. Do you start the first night with 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the way we do it, which is the opinion of Beis Hillel? Or do we go like Beis Shammai, which is to start the first night with 8 candles, and then each night diminish the number of candles by 1? So the Ben Yehoyada offers an interesting explanation. He says that it's brought down in Kabbalistic works that Bais Shammai symbolizes Gvura. Gvura normally is translated as strength, although from a Kabbalistic perspective, Gvura means constriction. And Bais Hillel symbolizes Chesed. Chesed, again, literally is translated as kindness, but in Kabbalistic terms, it means giving a tremendous amount. And therefore, that's why, according to Bais Shammai, who his avoda is constriction, and again, we'll talk more in the next class exactly how this applies to Chanukah, but that's why the numbers are diminishing, because you're in a process of constriction. As opposed to Bais Hillel, who is chesed, it's an ever-expanding amount of light. And the Ben Yoyoda says as follows, that in terms of metals, Gevura, again, that's Bais Shammai's opinion, and Bais Shammai's style, is symbolized by the word zahav, which is gold. That's because gold has a bit of a reddish tint to it. Whereas chesed, the unbounded giving of Bais Hillel, is symbolized by kesef, silver. And that's because kesef is much closer to the color white, which symbolizes chesed. But he says also, if you take a look, you will notice that in the word zahav, again, which symbolizes constriction, the numerical value of the letters goes down. It's the letters Zayin, Hey, Beis. Zayin is 7, Hey is 5, Beis is 2. So that indicates the constriction of Bais Shammai and the fact that the number of candles steadily diminishes. As opposed to the word kesef, silver, which symbolizes the chesed, the increasing light of Bais Hillel, over there the numbers go up. Kesef is chaf, samech, pei, and that goes from 20 to 60 to 80. Interesting. I just noticed as I'm seeing this, I have no idea if this has any meaning to it, but in the word zahav, gold, the first letter is zayin, and the next two letters, hey and beis, add up to zayin 7, as opposed to in kesef, the last letter is pei is 80, and the first two letters, chaf and saf, and samach, add up to 80. I have no idea if there's any meaning or symbolism to that, but just something interesting that just hit me. Have a wonderful day.